What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining me today. So we're going to jump into my preseason rankings and some of my predictions for the 450 class as we head into the start of the 2025 Supercross season. I went ahead and sorted out what I think will be the top 20 riders in the class and put them in order. I definitely think there's some hot takes in here that some of you are not going to agree with, and that's fine. The whole point is to give us some talking points here. Now, since I'm only doing 20, there is probably a few guys that could be interchangeable at the bottom. And then as far as the top 10, there's a lot of guys that could be interchanged in and out of the top 10 right on that edge. So I'm definitely curious what you guys think when it's all said and done. Let me know down in the comments below what you agree with and what you disagree with. But for now, let's go ahead and get into it. Starting out at number 20, this is where I'm going to go ahead and have Freddie Norren. So Freddie's been doing it for a lot of years now. He seemed to really struggle in Supercross in the past, especially on the 250 when he was first getting started. He seemed to get injured and things like that. He's always been really good at motocross, and we've seen that consistently now. But even last year, we saw some consistency in Supercross. He made more than half the main events. He's been down there training with the Club MX guys, and he looks pretty solid, so I'm really excited to see if he did step things up at all this year. But either way, he's right there knocking on the main event every single night. So in 20th, we have Freddie Norren. Then in 19th, we have Mitchell Oldenburg. So Mitchell is going to be racing for Factory Beta this year. Going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out. I feel like we are probably going to see something similar to what we saw out of Carson Mumford in the SMX rounds. Probably see some pretty good flashes of speed and probably some crashes, maybe some injuries. Not saying I wish that upon him, but I feel like overall he might have some bigger flashes than his teammate, who we're going to talk about in a second. But overall, he's probably going to finish off the season right behind him. Next, in 18th, we have his teammate Benny Bloss, who overall had a pretty good season last season. We haven't seen him out on the track in a while in comparison to Oldenburg, who did race WSX, and he looked decent. So it's going to be interesting to see if he made any changes or improvements in this long break that he's had from racing, or did that possibly negatively affect him? Gonna have to keep an eye on that. We have seen a few flashes out of Benny, but overall he's just kind of that consistent 15th place guy, and that's why I have him back here in 18th. In front of him, in 17th, we have Shane McElrath, and he's probably the guy who I would say has the highest ceiling of anybody on this list to move up on the list. So it's really unclear exactly what his plans are or what he's going to be doing. He has had a few rides in the 450 class, but nothing really good. He was on that Suzuki for a while, but they kind of dissolved that in the middle of the year last year. He was able to join up on the same team as Freddie Norren, and as far as I know, he's not going to be on that same team going into Supercross, but he very well could be. I'm not really sure. We did see him drop down to the 250 for Australian Supercross and WSX, where he won both of those championships. So it's kind of looking like he might be a 250 specialist. Unfortunately, he's not able to compete in the 250 class here in the States. So he will be on the 450 if he's competing, and I do expect him to compete. Exactly what bike or what team he's on, I'm not really sure, and how he does remains to be seen. But for now, I have him right in front of the beta riders. Then moving on to the next rider, we have Justin Hill. So we did see him race the majority of the Supercross season before he ended up getting landed on and getting hurt last season. He did come back and race some pro motocross races, and overall he looked pretty good. I do think that he could technically do better this season than he did last season, and he is a past Supercross champion. So that's why I have him above the rest of these guys. But he's not on a factory team or anything, so definitely has his struggles. Moving on to the top 15, right here is unfortunately where I'm going to have to put Cristian Craig. So another guy who could definitely move up on the list, especially as the year moves onward. But I definitely have my concerns after watching him struggle last year. Ever since he had that crash a couple years back in Anaheim in the whoops at the start of the season, it just never really seemed like he was the same. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how he does now that he's back on that Yamaha. But we also have to keep an eye on the fact that he is just coming off of knee surgery. It's not even clear if he's going to be at Anaheim, so keeping an eye on that. It looks like he is back on the bike, but even if he is at Anaheim, definitely going to have to expect some time for him to build and get back to where he was. He wasn't very clear on exactly what the knee damage was. I don't think it was an ACL tear. It sounds like it was probably an orthoscopic surgery. So hopefully we can get some more insight on that as the season starts and we get more press around these guys. But for now, I just can't put him ahead of any of these other guys that are still on the list. Next in 14th, we have Colt Nichols. So another past Supercross champion. In fact, looking at everybody on this list, 16th and above are all past champions if you include Jorge Prado's MXGP championships. So we saw Colt leave Beta at the end of last Supercross season and switch over to Suzuki, and that change did seem to suit him fairly well. Unfortunately, we did see him get collected at World Supercross and go down, so he's been recovering from that crash and injury. I do expect him to be starting off the season, but if he's still feeling the effects of that crash remains to be seen. So we have to keep an eye on that. He's definitely not somebody that I would pick to be right inside the top 10, especially right out of the gate. But you also can't count him out. He has gotten close to the top 5 before in this class, and he is a past Supercross champion. So anyways, right here in 14th, we have Colt Nichols. And then in 13th, right in front of him, to some people, this is probably going to be a hot take. To me, it makes sense, but definitely let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I have Jorge Prado. So Jorge's coming over. He did switch to Kawasaki. I just don't see how we can put him ahead of any of these other guys that are still on the list in Supercross. Obviously, I do expect him to be a lot better in Pro Motocross, but as of right now, I just can't put him any higher than 13th. His best finish last season was 7th, and that was at the San Francisco round, which was completely blown out and not even really a Supercross. And other than that, he really didn't have that good of a time staying inside the top 10. I do expect him to do better this year and probably get some top 5s, but even a podium I feel like is just kind of off the table this season. I feel like anytime he's inside the top 5, it's going to be an extremely good ride for him. And I also feel like there is a chance that he won't even get a top 5 this season. But I also feel like there are some people who think he could go out there and win. So definitely let me know if you're on that side. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. But anyways, moving on to 12th place, that's where I have Dylan Ferrandis. So last year, he had his best finish at the season opener, which was a 5th. And he ended up getting 12th overall in the championship after having some different infections and crashes and things like that. So I definitely think he could finish in the top 10 overall. He is a 2-time Supercross champion. I haven't heard much about his plans for the long term, so I'm really curious to see if he's going to keep racing, if this is his last year, or what the plans are here. But as of right now, I have him right here in 12th. Next up in 11th, another guy who could probably move up the list, but as of right now, I'm just having a hard time putting him in front of these other guys, is going to be Justin Barcia. So looking back at last season, he did get a podium and he did finish 8th overall in the points. So just looking at that, he's probably a little bit too low on this list, but when you hear everybody else who's still on the list, it'll make a little bit more sense. Now, Justin Barcia did have to switch over to Rockstar as things with the KTM group are kind of deteriorating, and he's basically going to be like a gas version of a teammate to Malcom Stewart. Technically still 2 different teams, but not really. He's still going to be wearing Troy Lee, but as far as that whole Troy Lee gas team, that thing's basically gone. Troy Lee's no longer affiliated with gas, and he's going to be wearing Rockstar. So going to be an interesting new look for him. Things are changing. He's getting older. He is having a lot of knee problems. He struggled with his knees last year, especially in motocross. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can overcome that in Supercross. He definitely could get up there and win. He's probably the first guy on this list we've talked about so far that I could really see winning a main event. But realistically, I would still be kind of surprised if that happened. And that's why I have him just outside the top 10. Next, probably another hot take for some people, in 10th place, I have Hunter Lawrence. So I know a lot of people are probably going to freak out at this. Personally, I feel like this is exactly where he belongs. Nothing against Hunter. I think he's great and he showed a lot of improvement last year. He really improved throughout the Supercross season, especially if you look at the way his season started at Anaheim 1. But I definitely have my concerns, especially when it comes to Supercross. If you look at the way that he was riding in Paris, it really didn't look like that bike was working too good for them. Obviously, they've had time to work on that, and I'm sure they have found some settings. I feel like Hunter is more dependent on settings than Jett, and he did not look like he was on pace in the way that he was at the end of the American Supercross series when they were on the old bike. So that is one concern I have with Hunter. The other concern that I have is he just wasn't that exceptionally good at Supercross last season. He had 2 podiums, with one of them being a 2nd. So definitely a really good rookie season. Definitely pales in comparison to Jett, but pretty much everything does when you compare anything to Jett. I think a better comparison would be Justin Cooper. And if you compare his season to Justin Cooper, it was relatively similar, but I feel like Justin Cooper's Supercross season was slightly better, and that's why he's a little bit higher up on this list. Next in number 9, we have Malcom Stewart. And the reason I have him in front of Hunter, which I know a lot of people are not going to agree with, is partially based off of what we saw in Paris. And I'm not trying to put too much weight into the off-season races. I know if we did that looking at last season, we would have all thought that Cooper Webb was absolute garbage, and we saw that he actually ended up being Jett's biggest challenger overall. So definitely not trying to put too much weight into the off-season races, but there are some other circumstances surrounding him. If you look at the landscape of the 450 class right now, it looks like we could potentially be losing Gas, and the future of the whole KTM group and the teams surrounding that is kind of up in the air, and his contract is expiring. So either way, he's going to be needing a ride after this, and I really don't think he wants to be done after this year. So he definitely has a point to prove, and he definitely has shown signs of having that speed that we know that he has had in the past, where he can get out there and lead and probably contend for podiums and maybe even a race win. So I feel like it's going to be interesting to see if he can carry that through the whole season. We did see him come around and get 3rd overall a few years back in the championship. So we know he can go the distance of a full season. He's done it before. And that's why I have him ranked ahead of Hunter, because he has the experience to do it. And we have seen signs of that speed returning, and he has a reason to do it. So I definitely think Hunter could have a better season than him by a long shot. But as of right now, I have him just edging out Hunter. One other thing I think you have to consider with Malcom is there are quite a few rides potentially opening up, with Triumph and Ducati also potentially joining the class. So he could theoretically re-sign with Husqvarna. He could theoretically have a ride with maybe somebody like Ducati or even Triumph. And maybe a team like Beta goes and tries to grab someone like Malcom and up their program. So there are places for him to go and things for him to prove. I definitely think he's going to push it this year. Then right in front of him in 8th, I have Justin Cooper. So Justin Cooper, I just think that he's been really solid. We've seen him have that raw speed at times. If I'm not mistaken, I think he even had some fastest qualifiers in Supercross last year. But what I can tell you for sure is that he did get 2nd at the last round of Supercross. So coming off of his most recent Supercross race, he was on the podium and he was only 1 step off of the top slot. Obviously, those were some extenuating circumstances with the championship winding down, but nonetheless, you don't forget that as a racer, and you're going to kind of hold on to that. And then you have to consider that he's been on Star Yamaha his entire pro career, and when you couple that with the fact that this is supposed to be Eli Tomac's last season, he has to feel like he wants to go out there and prove that he deserves a better, 2 or 3 year deal as Eli retires, and try to solidify himself as a guy who's going to stay on that team, with Hayden Deegan looming to be moving up to that 450 in the next year or two. You know that he kind of understands that dynamic. So he's going to want to go out there and have a good season and try to prove to those guys that they should keep him. It's going to be interesting to see if they want to try to downsize back down to a 2-rider team, or if they're going to go ahead and stick with this 3/4-rider team that they have, with Cristian Craig kind of being a teammate to these guys as well. But my thing with Justin Cooper is we know he has the speed, and he's been pretty vocal about the fact that he just kind of rides a little bit too conservative in the race, and he just holds himself back, and that he's going to try to turn it loose this year and try to really end the race with a lot less in the tank. So could we see some more mistakes out of him? Probably. But could we see some better overall finishes? I really don't think that's out of the question either. And even if he just stays the same, he should be right around here in this 8th place overall. So now we obviously have 7 guys left on the list, and I feel like there's quite a spread between everyone that we've talked about and everyone who's left on the list. I know there are probably some people that consider Hunter Lawrence a part of this upper group in Supercross. Personally, I don't think he's made that leap yet. I feel like he could be on the podium, and if the stars aligned, he could get a race win, but I really don't think he's there yet. So anyways, in 7th, the number 7 is going to be Aaron Plessinger. So I feel like Aaron is really starting to solidify himself as one of the guys We saw him finally get his first Supercross win last year at San Diego. He almost got that moto win at Hangtown when Chase went down and had that epic comeback ride from last to first. He pretty much led the entire race except for the last 2 corners. It seems like he's improving every year, and he's been extremely consistent, barely missing any races. He did have that elbow injury at the end of Supercross last year, which did drop him down in the points a little bit, but we also saw him carry the red plate for a few rounds in the Supercross season at the beginning of the season. So definitely some good consistency and some better results than we've been seeing out of him. I definitely feel like he's solidified himself as one of the guys in the top of this group, but I also feel like his raw speed and his mental game is just not quite there with everybody else that's left on this list, and that's why he is in number 7. Then in 6th, I have Ken Roczen. So we saw Ken Roczen go down pretty hard at Nashville last year. He had that shock malfunction, and then he got tossed over the bars, ended up breaking his leg. And obviously, we did see him come back since then, and we saw him race World Supercross, where he did end up having a couple of good results, but overall, he did look a touch off of Eli. So I definitely have him back just a little bit based off of that. It's hard to say exactly how much of that is just Eli riding really good, or is Ken still struggling a little bit. But at the same time, we haven't seen Ken really light it up consistently for a while now. He's been getting those 1 to 2 win race seasons for a few years now. I definitely think he could get another one this year, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. So for right now, I have him just outside the top 5 in 6th. And then rounding out our top 5, I know some people are probably not going to agree with this, but this is where I have Jason Anderson. And the reason I have Jason Anderson right here is kind of similar to some of the reasons I had some of the other guys where they were at. It is going to be a contract year for him. There's a lot of rides opening up. I think he wants to stay at Kawasaki, but one thing I know is that he doesn't want to be done. So definitely look for him to prove himself. He's definitely kind of had his ups and downs, but one thing that you cannot say about him is that he doesn't have a Supercross championship, because he does. And that's something that he has over everybody else that he's above on this list right now. Even Ken Roczen has come close, but he's never won a Premier Class Supercross championship. And even looking back to 2022, he didn't win the championship, but he probably should have. He ended up having 7 wins, and that was with Eli Tomac out there racing the whole season, who eventually ended up winning the championship. But that wasn't that long ago, and that was on the team that he's currently on right now. So we've seen him have the raw speed to really go out there and dominate the field. It's just the last couple of years he hasn't put it together. So can he get separated from this drama that's on and off the track with the Lawrence brothers and kind of lock in and just ride and get some good results? It's definitely going to take some good starts, but he has a new teammate in Jorge Prado, who is one of the best, if not the best, starters in the game right now. And it'll be interesting to see if he can translate any of that over to his starts and kind of get his starts a little bit better. And if you put Jason Anderson out in front of these guys, I don't think that anybody's going to have an easy time passing him, not even Jett. So that could be interesting to see. But either way, as of right now, I have him in 5th. I definitely think he could get a win this year. We saw him come close. He started off the season last year with a 2nd place. So definitely something that's within the realm of possibilities. Then moving on to 4th, this is where I have Eli Tomac. So I know a lot of you are probably not going to like this. I even just ran a poll on our community page as to who do you think will be the guy who will give Jett the main challenge this year, who's his main competitor. And most of you voted Eli Tomac. And while I don't fully disagree with that, out of the other 2 options I offered, which were Chase Sexton and Cooper Webb, I feel like he's probably the least likely. And that's just because he has had a lot of injuries in the last couple of years. Even last season, we saw him go out with an injury at the end of Supercross, and we saw him go out at the end of the last season before that with an injury. So he is riding really well. I do think if he rides to his full potential all season long, he definitely could be the guy to take it to Jett, and I would love to see it. But if I had to pick an order to put these guys in right now, I feel like Chase and Cooper are both significantly younger. Cooper's a real racecraft guy. He's similar on speed, definitely a little bit off when compared to Tomac, but you know, if I had to pick a reason to put somebody behind the other, I would just have to say that Tomac's age is making it a little bit hard on him, so that's why I have him all the way back here in 4th. But I just want to make it clear that any of these top 4 guys could go out and win any night, and any of them could win the title, in my opinion. Moving on to our podium in 3rd overall, this is where I have Chase Sexton. Now, I do have a lot of concerns with Chase Sexton, but I also think there's a lot of upside with Chase Sexton. So my concerns with Chase are obviously the things that are going on with KTM on the back end and their bankruptcy and financial issues and things like that. It's going to be interesting to see if that team even carries on. I think it probably will. I don't think it's going to necessarily directly affect Chase. I don't think he really cares about all of that. But what I also think is another issue is that he's been having a lot of bike issues. We saw that really hinder him at the start of last season. I think they've worked through the majority of those. But generally speaking, I don't think he's 100% where he would like to be with the bike. I don't think that most riders are ever fully 100% happy with everything on the bike. But I feel like he's probably further off than the last 2 guys on this list. And I feel like with Chase, that matters more than the last 2 guys on this list. I feel like Jett, he could ride a banana and still be successful. But the good thing with Chase is that we know when he's on and he's locked in, there's really nobody who can beat him in raw speed. I feel like Jett could definitely go with him and match his speed. But if you put Chase out in front in a whole shot on a night he's feeling good, and Jett say 3rd, 4th, or 5th, I just don't see how he's going to ever get around Chase on that night without Chase making a mistake or something. Now, will we have many or any of those nights? That remains to be seen, but I definitely think that's the kind of upside we have with Chase Sexton, and that's why I have him right here in 3rd. And then in 2nd, I have Cooper Webb, and in my opinion, I think he's the guy who could definitely give Jett the biggest challenge this year, at least if you zoom out and look at it for all 17 rounds. Looking at last season, Cooper Webb did end up winning 4 races, and that was with, having that major thumb injury with the last few rounds. And he did take it to the final round, even though he basically only had half a hand on one side. So definitely props to him. He proved that he really wanted it, and he definitely made some major improvements even from, say, Paris at the start of the season or the end of the off season, whatever you want to call it, to Anaheim 1, where he came out looking really good. And he really proved that that switch to the Star Yamaha team was the right move, and he really proved that his complaints with the KTM was valid. And now we see Chase struggling with that same platform. So really interesting to see that. But either way, just based off of Cooper Webb's racecraft and the way that he just never gives up, and the fact that he does have a really good speed, and at sometimes he is the fastest guy, even though those are not very often, I just don't see how you can put very many people above him at this point. He's definitely right there on a similar level to Sexton and Tomac. But if you look back to 2019, there hasn't really been a season in Supercross where he wasn't a title contender since then. He did go out with some crashes and injuries in some seasons, but overall, until he either had a major setback from a crash or injury, he pretty much either wins the championship or takes it all the way down to the end of the season. And for that reason, I just don't think that you can count him out, and that's why he's right here in 2nd. Again, we saw him take it all the way down to the last round, even though he was injured for the last few rounds of the season. And then at the top, obviously, I think it's pretty much an agreement that everybody has Jett Lawrence at the top here in 1st. So the question has become, who can beat Jett? Will anybody beat Jett? How many wins is Jett going to win? So my prediction with Jett is, looking at last season, we see that he got 8 wins. That was his rookie season. He did a lot of things that people have never done before. He won his first ever 450 Supercross. So that was pretty cool to see. I was actually there in person, and I think that he could definitely keep that going. I think he could come out and win at Anaheim 1 once again. I do think we could see him win a few more races this year than last year, and I think if he does that, then that's pretty much going to wrap up the title, unless he can't finish the season for some reason. I think that, if he gets any more than 9 wins, then the championship is pretty much his if he just finishes off the season. So if I had to predict, I think he's going to get between 8 to 10 wins, which pretty much means I'm giving him the championship. Obviously, that could change if he gets injured at the end of the season or something like that, but I do expect him to get around that much. And if he stays on track with that type of pace throughout his career and he raises his full career, he could definitely go after that McElrath record that he was talking about. So going to be interesting to see what trajectory he builds throughout his career as far as his win records go. It's also going to be really interesting to keep an eye on how he comes out at the start of the season. Like I said, I really don't think that bike setup is that crucial for him. His brother Hunter has said as much. He said that, you know, he's a little bit more in tune with the bike settings and what they do, and he cares a little bit more about that, where his brother could just kind of ride whatever and just adjust his body to that. So as far as the new bike, I'm not really concerned with it like I am Hunter. But if there was something that these guys could hold on to hope that maybe it will slow him down, I think that's what it would be. Other than that, there's really not much that's showing a sign of weakness on his end. So really the only thing I think it's going to keep Jett from winning races is if he gets bad starts and has to come through this deep field. And based off of what we've seen, he really isn't getting bad starts very often, and they did switch to full get ECUs and stuff like that. So it sounds like they're going to be able to have even better settings coming off of the start. So that's going to be interesting to see. Sounds like a lot of things for these guys to worry about, and all good things for the Lawrence camp. I do expect pretty much domination out of Jett. Not necessarily what I want to see. You never want to see somebody just dominate the whole series, but that's kind of my prediction. So just running back through the list quickly from the top, at number 1 we have Jett Lawrence, then Cooper Webb, Chase Sexton, Eli Tomac, Jason Anderson, Ken Roczen, Aaron Plessinger, Justin Cooper, Malcom Stewart, Hunter Lawrence, Justin Barcia, Dylan Ferrandis, Jorge Prado, Colt Nichols, Cristian Craig, Justin Hill, Shane McElrath, Benny Bloss, Mitchell Oldenburg, and Freddie Norren. Definitely let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. What you agree with, what you disagree with, what your thoughts are. What are you most excited about for this season? It's basically 1 week away from the start of the Supercross season. I'm super excited, as I'm sure you guys are as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.